Welcome to Hearthside Creations. I'm Corinne, a writer, knitter, and creative guide living in the woods of central Maine. Let's start with some tea. I'm drinking traditional Medicinal's Echinacea Plus because it is that time of year. This week, I wanted to show you how I begin a knitting project. Last year, my friend Jess at Wandering Stitches gave me a gift card for Fiber and Vine, our local yarn shop. I've been waiting for just the right project to cross my path, and last week I purchased some gorgeous Juniper Moon Farm Santa Cruz organic merino wool in the colorway Cerulean. Let's wind up these hanks. But first, can we just pause and give these January sunbeams a moment? They are rare and amazing. So yes, this is a hank. There are also skeins, balls, and cakes of yarn. So let's get into it. A hank is a bunch of yarn wound in a loose circle, sometimes tied in places to stay orderly, and then twisted in on itself. You need to wind hanks before use, otherwise you'd end up with a huge mess. Skeins of yarn are more contained and are already wound for you. Some people still wind skeins into their own balls or pull from the center and get to work. A ball of yarn is self-explanatory. We end up using all of these terms interchangeably, but now we both know the correct ones, at least according to the internet. Use a swift and a ball winder to create yarn cakes. You'll see them stacked up after winding. The combination of a swift and winder is one of the best investments you can make if you're a knitter, in my opinion. They save a lot of time and energy, and it's another meditative part of the process. It forces you to slow down and focus on the winding to ensure you catch if something happens and the yarn starts acting up. This yarn is pretty affordable at $14 per hank, especially for organic yarn. Like any hobby, knitting can get as expensive as you want. I tend to use the fancier yarns for smaller projects like shawls, hats, cowls, or even socks, and then the more affordable yarns for sweaters. Peace Fleece, Cascade, and Juniper Moon Farms are all of my go-tos, as well as knit picks. Before I bought the yarn, I decided on my pattern and the size I'd make based on the schematic. More on the pattern later on in the video. With this information, I could work out how much yarn I needed. Now, I'm marking up the pattern by highlighting the instructions for my specific size. This makes it so much easier to glance at the pattern and quickly find out how many stitches you're to cast on, what rate to work increases or decreases, pattern repeats, etc. It's a small step, but saves a lot of time and aggravation. I always talk about saving time. We just want more time for knitting. It's also a good time to read through the pattern to get an idea of the flow and what you'll be doing. There's all sorts of needles that you can use, and it really comes down to preference. Wooden, plastic, or metal, circular or straight. When I first started knitting, I used straight needles, but once I learned how to use circulars, metal in particular, I never looked back. Same with these interchangeable needles. I first tried Addi Turbos and used them for years, but have found Chaya Gu needles to be my favorite. The red cords don't store memory, and the joins of the needles and cables is such that I've never had my yarn snag. Another top-notch investment, but not something you need to begin with. If you are a beginner, I always suggest starting on bamboo needles, as I've found the stitches aren't as quick to slip off like on metal ones. Here, you can see how they work. There's different lengths of cords and different size needle tips. These screw in, and there's a tightening mechanism that helps you to take the tips on and off. This system also makes changing needle sizes as the pattern goes on It's super easy. I also like how contained my needles are in this zip-up organizer. Once the needles are put together, it's time to cast on. Now, here comes my most controversial knitting move. I don't swatch. Again, more on that later in the video. This is the part I love, starting to work with the yarn and learn how it feels as it moves through my fingers in a familiar way. I also love when working on circular needles, you get to use a stitch marker for the beginning of the round. It's like adding a little bit of jewelry to your knitting. For this one, I picked a Moon Phases stitch marker. No, I hold it up at one point, but I wish I had put it closer for you to see because it's really cute. I'm still learning about all of this filming stuff, including the voiceovers. I know this one's a little wonky, but we'll keep working on it. Whenever I come to the next round, I'll slip this stitch marker from one needle to another, and this little charm will make me smile and remember that there's comfort in our phases and changes. In the next section of the video, I'm sitting down and chatting for a bit. I hope you'll join me. Thanks for your patience as I get more comfortable in front of the camera. You saw the beginnings, the winding of the yarn, cast on, all of the things. So I thought I'd take a few minutes and say hello and tell you a little bit more about the pattern that I'm using, why I chose this pattern, yarn choice, just some information about the process. I always think it's fascinating to see why people do the things they do or how they do the things they do. Just like in writing, everyone's knitting process is a little bit different. We use basically the same materials, but we all go about it in a different way. So yeah, I think it's kind of fun to see that. So I thought you all might want to as well. So the pattern I'm choosing, or I chose, is the Orna sweater by Brienne Moody. I'll put a photo of the finished pattern up so that you can see it. It is a paid pattern, so I don't want to give away too much of the information, but I can read to you from the description. It's a top-down yoked sweater that evokes the delicate yet resilient structure of sea urchin shells. The lace and cable patterns mirror the intricate textures found on these shells, capturing the harmony between strength and elegance that the sea embodies. Now, if you've known me for any amount of time, you know that I love the ocean and the beach and all things coastal. Where we live now is about an hour from the coast, and it's the furthest I've ever been. And sometimes I feel a little landlocked, and a little claustrophobic, actually, not being able to just drive 15 minutes to see the coast. So anything that I can do to remind myself that, memories and that sense of place is always within me, even if I can't get to it on a daily basis. It's always in me. And so it's partly why I have my tattoo of a wave. I think I got that when I turned 30, and we were first starting to talk about moving away from the coast. It took us a while to get there. Anyway, so that is the Orna sweater. Cables. All right. So first of all, this is a little shout out to Tracie of the Wild West, because I know we share this mug, and she's a delightful person, and she has a wonderful YouTube channel that I think you should go and check it out, especially if you love all things colorful, creative, artistic. Tracie's got you covered, so go check her out. I should put that down so that I don't spill it all over the place. This sweater
I'd been looking for a cable knit sweater pattern for a long time. Now, last year, I had a lot of body changes happen. Part of the reason why Jess gave me the gift card is because she knew that I was going to be making some changes to my knit wardrobe this year. I had a breast reduction last year for health reasons, and that has changed how my current sweaters sit and fit. Not drastically, but enough that makes me want to really dabble in and consider new shapes and design techniques as I move forward with my knitting. Body image and body stuff is always kind of on my mind. Finding a style, more or less, is on my mind. I don't feel like I've really embraced a set style. I haven't really figured out what my style is. And I don't think you need to. I think that can definitely help so that you're not floundering as you decide what clothes to buy, what knits to make, anything. I actually talked about this quite a lot in the January chapter of my book Paths Through the Year. And so I think it's funny that it's coming up for me again this January, that I'm really kind of taking stock of my choices in terms of what I feel good in, what I like, and what makes me comfortable. I think all those things. I chose this outfit because it's one of the ones that makes me feel the most like me. I love this green color. Can't remember off the top of my head what knit it is, but I always put and will always put the knit garments that I show in the description of the video. I love this green color. I do know it's Knit Picks palette in grass, and it's just a great bright color that makes me happy. And the t-shirt, it says, "It's your story, tell it." Years and years ago, I'm talking like probably over a decade ago, I think Jen Lee made these shirts back in the early blogging days. And this is super thin. You can see it's like tattered and it's torn in places. And I don't normally hold on to clothes that are tattered and torn, but this one just completely speaks to so many things about myself and about things that I believe. We all have stories to tell, and we should all tell them in whatever fashion or expression we choose to, because the world is better with our stories in it. So, all of that said, I am thinking more about making conscious decisions, which patterns I choose, what materials I use, and it's something to think about moving forward. So, like I said, I've been looking for a cable knit sweater pattern for a long time. I love Sari Nordland's patterns. I think she's a phenomenal designer. But what really struck me about this sweater in particular was the way it looks. There's no waist shaping in it, which sometimes I like waist shaping, sometimes I don't. But I love how when this sweater is worn, from the pictures you can see on Ravelry and from the designer's Instagram, it almost looks like it goes out a little bit. She suggests, I think, 4 to 6 inches in positive ease. So you make it a little bit bigger than your bust circumference. And so that allows for what looked like really nice draping in the photos. So fingers crossed. I'm really, as things changed, it's interesting how, how I look at my body and how there's still, I'm trying to decide how much I want to share on here or not. I have a hard time not saying things. So yeah. So as, my bust went down, I started noticing and feeling and seeing other parts of my body, not in a bad way, not in any kind of way, just a oh, my proportions changed kind of a lot. And then having a couple months of inactivity, I don't want to feel constricted this year. And so I want more free flowing knits that I don't feel like I'm going to be tugging at a lot or pulling down or anything. I just want more ease. So yeah, that's why I picked this design. I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to dive into cables. Cables are always so much fun to work with. They look super intimidating and super fancy, but they're really not. They're really, really easy. If you can knit and you can purl, cables are within your reach, because really what you do is you just hold stitches to the front or the back and then knit. Like, there's plenty of tutorials. You all do not need me to do tutorials, but I think it's a really cool feature. I love the way that they look. I love the way that they feel. A lot of times you get a more bouncy texture, like a more airy texture. There's lots of air that gets trapped into cables. So your finished product ends up being super, super warm. And on a day like today, I think it was a really good idea to get started on it, because it is so cold here in Maine. I don't know if you can hear the wind blowing over the microphone. It is gray and cold and just frigid. We did not get a lot of the snow. We didn't get the storm that hit a lot of the states yesterday and the day before, and so we actually don't have much more snow on the ground. We have just little bits that haven't melted, and what is there is really icy. So it's just cold. So if I can bring a little bit of that coastal feel, think about sunshine and being on the beach and soaking up those that vitamin C, and have a nice knitting project to keep me warm and cozy. I think that's the perfect thing to get through these first few weeks of January. I think that's all I wanted to say about the pattern. And what else did I want to talk about today? I guess I could tell you about, so I first started knitting when I was very, very young. I was taught by my mom, and I remember making just really simple stockinette, no, not even stockinette, garter stitch scarves for my grandmother, for my dad. I remember one I made where I switched colors and thought I was like being super fancy. And so I knit for a couple of years, didn't really do much with it. And then fast forward to when my kids were really little and I was going through kind of a difficult time, I started to think about knitting again. And I didn't remember anything. So I started off, and this was really before YouTube knitting and tutorials and everything were super, super accessible. So I went and got Knitting for Dummies book and retaught myself how to knit. Thankfully, Ravelry was around then, and patterns were accessible. And yeah, so I just started, and as soon as I kind of got the cast on, because casting on I think is the hardest part when you're first starting out. Once I got the hang of casting on again, there was some muscle memory that came back into play. And so from then on, I just kept going. And as you could tell from the beginning part of this video, there's, like I said, everybody does things a little bit differently. I do not swatch. I know my gauge. Like I know how I knit. I knit pretty standard across the board. And so for the most part, I can guess what the materials, what the yarn, and what the needles and what my knitting will produce. Doesn't always work out, and so sometimes I do have to rip back. But in general, I'm not a swatcher. So yeah, there's some things that I don't do that the experts say that you should do. But I think with anything, you just have to go with what feels right for you, especially with creative hobbies. We don't want to, or I don't want to feel like I'm being told exactly what to do and feel like I have to go by a set of rules or instructions for something that's supposed to bring me joy. And following other people's rules and suggestions sometimes helps, and sometimes it just is kind of a hindrance because you don't necessarily find that quiet that you need to really figure out your own process. I find that with writing too. I find a lot of parallels between writing and knitting, and I think I've spoken before about this, how they just kind of feed one another. And I have a writing client that I coach who is an art journaler also. And she has talked about how when she doesn't have words for something, because sometimes that happens, right? When she doesn't have words, she can turn to her art journaling and they come back to her somehow. Or she works through what she needs to through her art journaling. And then she can get back to her words. I don't find a lot of enjoyment out of drawing or sketching, but I can completely relate to that because of knitting. There's a lot of times when I will figure out plot holes while I'm knitting. The collar of this is a good example. I can, talk about these details because it's pretty standard. It's a 1x1 rib. And so I'll get into the rhythm of knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. And then my brain can kind of subconsciously work through things that I might not come as easily when I'm staring at the problem directly. I'm sure whatever kind of hobby or meditative practice, whether it's exercising, walking, running, knitting, sketching, yoga, meditation, any of those things, just working one part of the brain kind of allows for the other part to do its thing. And yeah, given a little space and ease, we can really find some really good insights and problem solving. It's not that I think that, you can't just chip away at something and it'll get you somewhere. That definitely works at times. But I think knowing when to follow your own ebb and flow is really important for all things creative. So I think that's what I wanted to touch on today. I'm so thankful that you're here watching these videos. I just want to thank everyone who's subscribed so far. If you haven't subscribed, please do so and leave a little like or a comment. Actually, I do have a question for you. I am looking for other creators who have relatively small audiences. I think, we all watch so many that have huge followings. They don't really need any more shout outs. But I'd love to connect with some other folks who have maybe like 2,000 or under subscribers. So if you could leave in the comments your favorite small YouTube channels, I would love that. I would love to check them out and to connect with them and to see what other sort of channels you all enjoy. So thank you for watching. If you want more information about me or any of the knits, just go ahead and check in the description. There's also links to my website, my Patreon, where I share essays on all of the topics that you'll see here on the channel. And I host some writers and makers sessions with some gentle coaching from me. So all of my information is in the description. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.